Good afternoon. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Andy Cole, and I'm the Ordnance Sergeant for the 1st North Carolina Battalion, 4th Regiment A and V. And I've been in the hobby for 30 years. I've been Ordnance Sergeant for a good number of those, and I'm a gunsmith and own a gun business and a machinist. So I've been around this a while, and I just want to talk to y'all today about something that I've seen over the years with inspecting of muskets that's not necessary, and it actually causes damage to the muskets. It's very common when inspecting arms, people will spring their ramrods and inspection arms, up they come, they hand off the musket, they do the obligatory, ramrod ping, and then you'll see them go to half cock, pull the trigger, and then they'll start beating the back of that hammer. Pull it full cock, let it down, and then they hand it back. So the beating on the back of the hammer is entirely unnecessary, and it's not required. I've checked with the National Park Service, and I've talked to the North Carolina employees of the North Carolina Department of Cultural Resources and how they inspect muskets, and it's not required. I understand that that's a thing that has been in the hobby a long time, but I do have an example of a musket that was at the Gettysburg Living History in August of 24, where the participant's musket was damaged, and it wouldn't pass inspection beyond that, and it was due to heavy-handed inspections. And I've seen it before, but I've never had I never had the ability to get the lock and to study it like I have this one. So I really appreciate, I don't know if we call his name or not, but I really appreciate the individual who has actually given me or loaned me his musket lock, which we'll look at in greater detail. And I'll show you what happens. So this is for those of you first sergeants or acting first sergeants who do musket inspections. And I wanted to get this out in time for Bentonville, which is coming up next week. But when you're inspecting, there is no need to hammer to beat on the back of that hammer. And that safety catch, if you apply a couple of pounds of pressure with your trigger finger and it doesn't fall, in certain instances, when I was talking to the state park people, the Department of Cultural Resources, they say that if they got plenty of time, that sometimes they'll hang it upside down and let it, if the trigger can carry the weight of the musket, then it's fine. But beating on the back of this will actually damage the sear, and in this particular instance, not only did it damage the sear, it also damaged the tumbler. So we'll look at those in a little greater detail individually here in just a second, and hopefully we'll all learn from this. Those of you who are inspecting muskets, don't pound on the back of the hammers, because this is oftentimes the most expensive part of a kit when people get into reenacting, and nowadays new muskets are running up into $1,000, and the parts are hard to come by sometimes, and they too are expensive. So let's just be careful with handling. Make sure that the safety works, which is half cock. It doesn't fall when you pull on the trigger, and it works smoothly. Other than that, when you're inspecting muskets, obviously you just listen for the ping. We're looking for no cracks in the stock. We're looking for no rust, no bulged barrels, things of that nature. But the one thing that is damaging these lock plates is those of you who beat the back of the hammer. So stick with me a minute and we'll dismantle. We'll have a damaged lock and an identical undamaged lock, and you'll be able to see what I'm talking about. Here we have two nearly identical lock plates, both from British pattern 1853 Enfield rifles, probably the most common reproduction musket we find in the hobby today. So this is an undamaged lock. This is a damaged lock. Now externally, you really can't see much of the difference. You'll be able to see that quite obviously here in a moment. Now, take note that on the very first day of the Gettysburg National Park Service Living History that we do every August, this individual's musket passed no problems. The second day, is when the failure occurred. Now, he had driven a long way, just like the rest of us, and was unable to participate that day. And that gets pretty discouraging. So this is the damage that is caused by being a little bit abusive with the hammering of the back of the hammer. So first, let's look at what a good one is supposed to look like. So this guy here is your sear. And when you pull the hammer, it engages a half-cocked notch right there. That's the safety position for the lock. If you pull the trigger, nothing happens. Then full cock is all the way to the rear. You pull the trigger, it falls. Now, by constant beating, and I suspect it happened over time, it's just a compound injury. If you notice, the end of his sear is rounded, and you'll get a better picture of that in a minute. So if you pull it to half cock, it catches, but if you pull the trigger, it falls. It would go to full cock, pull the trigger, at half cock it falls, full cock, and you've got a hair trigger, and it'll go off. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take the bridles off of both of these and let you see how they interact with one another, and it will, how the sear interacts with the tumbler with this bridle off. Now, I don't recommend y'all do this at home. I also don't recommend that you do this in a working firing musket, but for demonstration model here in my kitchen, we're going to do it and let you see where the problem happened. So here is the undamaged lock with the bridle removed and the sear put back. So this is the sear spring, tumbler, main spring, and you have this little guy here called a stirrup. Now, notice how nice and straight the sear is on this good one. There's a half cock notch right there. And it is so that when you pull it back, and it is undercut so that there is a little shelf that sits right below the sear. So that when you try to pull the trigger, that sear cannot move downward out of that safety notch. Beating on the back of the hammer, all that does is shove this harder into your sear. Now, once it passes to full cock, that is a square cut notch. It is not undercut like this one. When you pull the trigger, the sear will drop out and that tumbler will fly past and the hammer will fall. Don't blink. Just like that. Half cock is the safety. It's undercut. This cannot come straight down anymore because of that point. If I don't care, if I sit here and I push on that, it's not going to fire. Full cock, trigger, and it fires. So here comes the damaged one. Now, by beating on the back of that hammer, while this was in the safety notch, it has bent that sear upwards. Now, it will partially engage. Let me move my finger out of the way because the hammer hurts. I know. It partially engages in the notch. And the continued beating on the back of that hammer has rounded the sear, and the sear coming out has also damaged the undercut on the half notch. Now, I'm going to be very careful here because this is a hair trigger, but you see how that sear is just barely, it is just barely hanging on to that square notch. And the slightest pressure, fall, and sometimes they do exactly that. They catch halfway when they should go all the way. You pull the trigger and it'll continue to fall. This is what makes muskets fail inspection or make them catch halfway at half cock. When you pull the trigger and it goes only halfway and stops, it's because inspectors are beating the wheels off the back of these hammers and damaging these sears. So at the very least, this lock is going to have a new sear. However, I'm fairly certain that this tumbler has been damaged to the point where it may no longer hold even with a new sear, because the undercut notch here has been rounded off. So now I'm going to take both the sears out, and I have a photo of them side by side so that you will be able to see the damage, but it's quite obvious. This sear is bent. I suspect the bend in that sear was accelerated by hitting the half-cock notch when it fired sometimes too. Notice here on the good lock how nice and cleaned into the sear is and how the strong undercut is on the half-cock notch. This is the damaged one with the bent sear, and the half-cock notch has been worn away, leaving a square shoulder. This makes this tumbler and sear dangerous. Thank you for sticking with me. I hope the video wasn't too long. Maybe now you got a greater understanding of how the sear interacts with the tumbler inside the lock plate, and why it's important for that half-cock notch to be a full length or a full depth engagement, and how when you pull the trigger, if it can't come out, there's no need to beat on the back of the hammer. That's a needless and dangerous thing to do for the musket. So I look forward to seeing y'all all in the field at Bentonville next week. If you have some musket repairs or clearings that need done, bring them to me. I'll be out there. God bless you.